So here's the iPhone 16 Pro Max in Desert Titanium. I've been using this phone for a couple of days now, and I want to talk about my experiences with this phone and tell you everything that's new about this phone and things like that. So let's get started. First and foremost, here's the phone. Here's the iPhone 16 Pro Max right here in Desert Titanium. And if you haven't seen this phone in person, I would personally say this is the best color for the 16 Pro and Pro Max. I absolutely love this color. It's more like a light gold color. You can see on the sides of the phone it is gold, and the back is kind of like this light gold. Overall, I really do like this color. It really does look like a premium smartphone for sure with this color. Now let's get this right out of the way really quickly. If you're coming from last year's 15 Pro Max, don't waste your time with this phone. This phone pretty much doesn't have any major improvements over last year's Pro Max to where you feel like you have to buy this phone. This feels more on the lines of one of those S years from way back in the past, like the 4S, the 5S, and the 6S. That's pretty much what we're talking about here. Now, if you're coming from something like the 14 Pro Max, 13 Pro Max, 12 Pro Max, or something that's much older, then you may want to consider buying this phone because you may see some slight improvements and you may get some nice things that you didn't know were even necessary to your experience. But again, coming from last year's phone, it just seems like a waste of money in my opinion. Also, after using this phone, I realized this phone is really not for me because I'm still on a 15 series phone and there's really no reason for me to actually have this phone. But I will be giving this phone to a family member that's actually on an old 11 phone. So they're going to get a pretty nice upgrade when it comes to their iPhone experience and when it comes to their smartphone game. So I'm kind of excited for them to actually use this phone. I just really wanted to test it out for a couple of days, use the phone, feel the phone, review the phone, look at the phone, and things like that. Now let's actually talk about what's different between this and the 15 Pro Max from last year. When it comes to the major differences, one of the major differences for sure is going to be the fact that this phone does actually have a bigger screen from last year's iPhone 15 Pro Max. It actually has a 6.9-inch screen compared to a 6.7-inch screen. I know some people are worried about the difference in screen size because this is bigger, and it's not just removing the bezels. Yes, they did make the bezels thinner on this phone, which is really nice. That means you do get more screen real estate, but they also made the phone a little bit more taller and slightly wider when it comes to the dimensions of this phone. So it's not really a big deal at all in my opinion, because if you're used to something like the 15 Pro Max or any other iPhone that does have a 6.7-inch display, you won't even notice the difference, and that's also including weight. You do have to keep in mind as well, this phone is still made out of titanium, and titanium is lighter than stainless steel. So I'm making this phone titanium. 6.9 inches is not really heavy, it's not really bulky, it's not really too much to worry about when it comes to taking this thing around, and I wouldn't worry about it. I use big screen phones, and I have used 6.7-inch phones before, and they're pretty much the same in the hands and identical when you use them. And it is also a little bit unfortunate that you really can't tell the difference as well. Even though you are getting slightly more screen because it's taller and a little bit more wider, you can't tell the difference, but I'll take it. Any more screen is still better than nothing, and you do technically get a little bit more on the screen just because it's a little bit taller and slightly wider when it comes to the width of this phone. But yeah, that's about it. Now, if you don't like big screen smartphones, then this phone obviously is not going to be for you, and it's not going to change your mind because, of course, it's still a big screen smartphone at 6.9 inches. And you may want to be careful about what cases you get for this phone, of course, because it is 6.9 inches, and of course, you don't want something too bulky since this phone is already big to begin with, for sure. And some other things they did add this year, which is really nice, on the right side of the phone, they actually gave us a camera control button. I know Apple doesn't like to call this a camera control button, but it is a button. It basically allows you to open that camera really fast. It also allows you to use your telephoto. It does allow you to change the exposure and stuff like that when it comes to this camera control button. But honestly, I'm not really a big fan of this button. I have been testing it out here and there, but I just don't like it. It feels really weird to actually use, especially if you're going to be taking pictures in portrait mode on your iPhone and not landscape. I will say too, it is kind of hard to use, especially if you are a person that's not going to be using a case on your phone. I really do feel like you could drop your phone quite easy without a case if you're going to be using that button. I just don't like the way it feels, and it doesn't help too that this button is flush with the phone and it doesn't protrude out of the phone like the standby button, the action button, or the volume up and down button. It's really flush with the phone. And you can also do these half presses, or these half yeah, I guess half presses you would say, with this actual camera control button. But it does take some time to get used to actually do like zooming, to do like changing like exposure, changing stuff like that. It does take some time to get used to. Honestly, if I had this phone and I kept it, I don't think I would ever use that button just to open the camera and take pictures, just because it doesn't feel right to me, and it's just, I wouldn't say a gimmick per se, but I just really don't like the button as well. And that button is also on all 16 models this time around. Same thing with the action button from last year's 15 Pro series. All the standard 16s do get that action button as well. So they have all the same buttons no matter which iPhone 16 you get, whether it's the base models or the Pro models. We all get the same buttons this time around. Now let's talk about specs and stuff like that. When it comes to the specs of this phone, the nice thing about the iPhone 16 series is the fact that every 16 series does pretty much get the same chip across the board. No longer do they use last year's chipset on the base model iPhones this year. They're all using the A18 processors, except for the Pro versions this year. Those ones, the 16 Pro and Pro Max, do get the A18 Pro chip. How much faster is the Pro chip compared to the regular A18? I can't really tell you honestly, but you do get a slightly better chip with the Pro models this year. But it's still great that they are running the A18 processor instead of an old processor from a year ago. And then all these iPhones, regardless of which model you get, all come with 8 gig of RAM standard, which is also very nice. They did that because Apple Intelligence needs 8 gig of RAM to actually use. And let's touch really quickly on Apple Intelligence real quick. First and foremost, the only phones that are capable of using Apple Intelligence are going to be last year's 15 Pro and Pro Max. The base 15s and later don't get access to Apple Intelligence. All 16 models do get Apple Intelligence regardless of what model you buy. You don't need a Pro to actually get Apple Intelligence, which is actually really nice. At the time of this recording, Apple Intelligence isn't actually out on the market. You will have to wait a couple of months before that hits the market. And if you are wondering, should you buy an iPhone specifically for Apple Intelligence, honestly, I really can't tell you that for sure, just due to the fact that I don't really know what Apple Intelligence has to offer when it comes to Apple Intelligence, because there is a lot of features to go over when it comes to Apple Intelligence. They're always going to be improving Apple Intelligence. Me, myself, personally, I don't know what I'm going to be doing with Apple Intelligence. I really need to see all the features that are listed with Apple Intelligence and to see if it's going to make my smartphone experience and my iPhone experience and my life easier and better when it comes to Apple Intelligence. Personally, I would wait for people to actually get Apple Intelligence in their hands and do full reviews on Apple Intelligence to see if it's something that you would want to use, if it will actually make your life better, if there's features that you need or want to actually upgrade to the phone. So right now, I wouldn't say it's a must-need feature to actually get Apple Intelligence. I will say, though, it is kind of disappointing that the base iPhone 15s from just a year ago don't get Apple Intelligence. It has to do with the RAM management. They only have 6 gigs of RAM and the processor is just not up to snuff on those phones, but it does suck considering how expensive those phones are. One thing that the Pro iPhones this year do get that the base models don't get, unfortunately, they're still locking Pro Motion to the Pro phones this year, which is kind of a shame considering that I think everybody should get a faster refresh screen just because it will make your iPhone experience better, less lag, faster inputs, a more smoother experience overall. I know why Apple does this. They do this because they kind of want to tempt people who know about the feature or hear about the feature, kind of just get the Pro and Pro Max versions, but it's not fair considering that there's cheaper phones out there that do already have faster refresh rate screens. And even if you don't think you need that feature, it just makes the smartphone experience better by having Pro Motion. So I don't know why they just don't want to give it to the base models. I'm sure at some time they will give the base models promotion, because it seems like a lot of the features that are on the Pro versions come down to the base models sometimes. So I'm sure maybe in a couple years we'll finally get faster refresh rate screens on the base models. And considering how expensive iPhones are, there's really no excuse for that, even on the base models. The base models should, in my opinion, have a 90 hertz display regardless, even if they wanted to cheap out and just give them 90 hertz. 60 hertz is a little bit too laggy. Could you get used to 60 hertz? Yes, you could get used to 60 hertz, but honestly, I just not really a fan of that considering how expensive the phones are. I know not everyone cares about that and not everyone understands or everyone can see it with their eyes, but for that price, still no excuse for that. One thing I'm not too happy about this year, which is not a big deal, but something to think about, is the fact that this time around with these phones, you do not get a brighter screen this year. It's still capped at 2000 nits for peak brightness. And remember, you only get peak brightness when you're outdoors in direct sunlight. If you're not in direct sunlight, you don't get peak brightness, but you really don't need peak brightness to begin with anyway all the time, because most of the time you're probably going to be indoors where you don't need 2000 nits of brightness because that's too bright. But I really wish they would have made these screens brighter because I'm always outdoors. Not to say that 2000 nits is dim or anything, but I would like to see a little bit higher considering other phones already have like 2600 nits of brightness and higher, so that's kind of a shame that they stayed with the same peak brightness with these phones. And the one nice thing though is they did actually make the nits of the phone the dimmest they've ever made it. It goes all the way down to 1 nit, and I personally like this because I do use my iPhone in the dark, so it is nice. I'll be able to use this with just 1 nit when I dim the screen all the way down to the dimmest setting. That is something I do like as well when it comes to that. The USB speeds on the USB-C port, I still think are faster on the Pro models this year for the 16 model. If you do actually want faster speeds, you have to get the Pro models. I think the base models still have USB 2.0 speeds instead of USB 3 speeds, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it is what it is. Now, the cameras on the back of this phone are actually slightly improved. You do actually get a brand new 48 megapixel ultra wide, which wasn't the case last year with the 15 Pro Max. So pretty much all the cameras across the board are going to be the same quality, which is nice because the ultra wide camera last year didn't look all the greatest. It didn't look bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it didn't look great at all, considering the other camera was already a higher resolution. So it is nice you are getting a better ultra wide camera if you use the ultra wide camera a lot when it comes to that. One thing I'm also disappointed as well is we still have the dynamic island, and I'm not a fan of it. It's not the end of the world, but it is something I wish Apple would just completely get rid of or make smaller. There's already phones out there that do have smaller notches on the actual screen, and you can see on the top of the screen how big the dynamic island is, and we've had that since the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max, I do believe, so it is time to get rid of that. I know in the future, most likely, they are going to make that make the dynamic island a little bit smaller, and they're going to put everything under the screen because we already have technology right now where you can actually put everything under the screen. It's only a matter of time, and I really do hope they do that. For most things you do on your phone, it's not really a big deal, but when you watch some content like videos in full screen and landscape mode, the dynamic island does cut into the content. Or if you're viewing a lot of photos on your photo gallery in full screen, it does get in the way of like people's faces and stuff like that. That's why I just don't like it. But I will say it's miles better in my opinion than the old notch that we had on the old iPhone 10 and above. I did not like that notch at all, and I still don't like the dynamic island, but I can put up with the dynamic island, especially considering as well, and especially considering that this phone does have a big 6.9-inch screen. Most of it is real usable screen real estate, so that is nice, and it does look better again than the notch from the past. All iPhone 16 models this year also get Wi-Fi 7 across the board, no matter which iPhone you get, which is really nice. Just keep in mind, you will have to have a Wi-Fi 7 router, which is very brand new if you want to take advantage of the brand new Wi-Fi 7, which is pretty nice for that as well. I don't know if they updated the modems in this phone for better 5G support. I'll have to really test that out on my own and things like that. And yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to this phone. It is running, of course, iOS 18. We are going to get Apple Intelligence in the future, which is going to give us more features. overall, the resolution of the screen is the same, but it doesn't matter because these screens look really nice and really crispy. No one will be disappointed. It's still that nice OLED screen on this phone, and it is pretty much all screen on the front, which is actually pretty amazing and pretty awesome. Honestly, by having very little bezel, you're pretty much just holding a piece of glass in your hand with a screen on it, which is actually pretty awesome. And this one is the one to go for sure if you want a phone that you're going to be using for everything. If it's your main device, I would personally go with the iPhone 16 Pro Max. If you do everything on your phone, maybe you watch videos, you look at photos a lot, you're multitasking, you're playing games, you're doing a lot, and you also need the bigger battery because of course this does have the best battery in any iPhone apparently, period, since iPhones come out. So that's great if you just need the most juice you can possibly need in an iPhone. This is going to be it. I'm glad they're updating the batteries in these phones as well. So that's one reason to go for the Pro Max over anything else, just the bigger battery if you're going to be away from a charger for quite some time. And yeah, I really can't think about anything else about this phone. It does feel nice in the hands. It's not really too heavy. They are using titanium for the build as well, like I mentioned, so it's not too bad. Overall, it does look like a really premium smartphone. And yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap up all I feel about the iPhone 16 Pro Max this time around. It's really kind of a disappointing year for the iPhone if you are into iPhones. But if you have an older iPhone and you want to upgrade, go ahead and upgrade. You'll really feel the difference. That's why I'm giving this again to somebody that's using an iPhone 11 base model. They're going to be really happy with their upgrade. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne signing out.